Okay. Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, participants. I'll first of all tender deep-seated apologies for starting late this morning. It was due to some technical glitches. But now that we're on course, today's conference promises to be an exciting and educative and interactive one. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, before we commence, we'll talk a little bit about the Chamber of Commerce, Abuja, and the Dispute Resolution Center. The Chamber of Commerce, Abuja, in 2017, saw a need, saw the importance of alternative dispute resolution. Its synergy with the Federal Direct Investment, FDI, and economic development in line with international best practices and modeling. Thus, they established the Dispute Resolution Center for the purpose of resolving business and commercial disputes within the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. But today, that Dispute Resolution Center is now a National Center for Dispute Resolution, as supported by NACIMA. Ladies and gentlemen, this morning, this is the first conference of its type. This is a conference where ADR practitioners, for the first time in Nigeria, but ADR practitioners are brought together with ADR secretaries to interface and exchange views relating to ADR and, most importantly, online dispute resolution, the way forward for online dispute resolution. The theme of today's conference is the alternative dispute resolution and the new era, the role of an ADR registrar in online dispute resolution. Following the keynote address on the theme, the keynote address will be handled by no other person but the erudite Professor Ofonze D. Amuchazi, a legal practitioner of about 30 years post-call, a senior advocate of Nigeria. Professor is also a fellow of the Institute of Mediation and Conciliation, ICMC. He's also a fellow of the Nigerian Arbitration Institute. He will help us do justice to this wonderful topic this morning. We also have a panel of 4 that will also help us throw more light on our topic for today. One of the panelists is Mr. Godwin Omoka, ACN, a senior advocate of Nigeria, a fellow of the Court of International Arbitration. He's also a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Mediators and Conciliators. He will also be joined by Mrs. Diane Okoko. Ms. Diane Okoko is also a legal practitioner. He's also a negotiator, a mediator. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll also be joined by Mrs. Ozioma Izora. a legal practitioner with interest in corporate law and commercial law, also a fellow of arbitration and a member of the Institute of Chartered Mediators and Conciliators. We'll also be joined by Mrs. Rachel Osesu, who is also a mediator, a conciliator, and arbitrator. She is also a trainer in arbitration and ADR services. She also holds a PhD. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the Dispute Resolution Center for Abuja Chamber of Commerce has over the years helped disputing parties in amicably resolving their disputes. The center has also improved the practice of ADR by conducting several ADR trainings, by the time our Registrar General comes in, we'll talk more that they provide listening services, they provide trainings, they provide academic trainings and materials and supply of those materials all over the country. Ladies and gentlemen, permit me on this note to introduce and call on the erudite Professor Ofonze Amucheazi, our keynote speaker for this morning. Professor, you're welcome, sir.
Good morning, and thank you, Ifeanyi, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. And thanks to the ADR Center of the Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry for this opportunity of delivering the keynote speech at the first annual ADR Conference and induction ceremony. I think it is a sign of the times in which we have found ourselves about the growing importance of ADR as a means of resolving disputes. The topic given to me is alternative dispute resolution and the new era, the role of an ADR registrar in an online dispute resolution. This is also the theme of the conference. I understand I have 25 minutes and I will try to talk to my paper. It's not very bulky, so that I can keep to the time I've been given. Once again, welcome on board to all participants. I'll start with an introduction. Alternative dispute resolution mechanisms have generally come to be accepted as viable means of resolving disputes outside of the conventional court system. ADR systems have over the years grown tremendously and have become a mainstay in dispute resolution processes, both nationally and internationally. However, the growing globalization of commercial transactions and the increasing use of electronic systems for trading have raised a greater need for a more flexible, real-time, and effective system for resolving disputes that arise from online and e-commerce transactions. These disputes have become a fundamental part of commercial transactions in the world. Online dispute resolution, otherwise known as and called ODR, is a mechanism for resolving disputes through the use of electronic communications and other information and communication technology systems. ODR mechanisms developed in recognition of the sharp increase of online cross-border transactions and the parallel need for mechanisms for resolving disputes arising from such transactions. For the majority of these cross-border e-commercial activities, the traditional ADR mechanisms will not optimally address the need of the parties for a simple, real-time dispute resolution solution, particularly where the value of the items involved are minimal and not worth the institution of a formal ADR process. ODR mechanisms also bridge an important gap in e-commercial transactions, the trust gap. For many consumers online, the lack of trust in e-commerce merchants is an important limitation on their willingness to engage fully in the e-commerce market. And even in developed countries, the trust gap is an important obstacle facing many online businesses, and bridging this gap is an important milestone in promoting e-commerce activities. ODR mechanisms bridge this gap by providing consumers with a quick, real-time, and flexible mechanism for obtaining quick remedies for grievances arising from the engagement in the online marketplace. Indeed, forward-thinking online merchants and leading e-commerce businesses have learned from experience that gaining consumer trust is critical to their success. They realized early on that they needed to create innovative next-generation systems for handling consumer problems that are quick, real-time, and utilize online facilities to provide the consumers with acceptable solutions. As a result, large e-commerce merchants with significant reliance on online commerce, such as eBay, Amazon, and PayPal, realized that the consumer trust problem was preventing many consumers from moving their purchases from physical to virtual marketplaces. They learned that addressing this trust issue by creating ODR systems could provide a valuable market advantage over their competitors, who will still be struggling with traditional dispute resolution mechanisms to address consumer complaints. Of course, we are all aware of how Amazon has benefited so much from the COVID-19 pandemic. ODR is therefore a powerful competitive differentiator for e-commerce businesses, one with a different positive impact on the bottom line for these businesses. Research conducted by eBay, for example, showed that they earn more money by making things easier for consumers to get remedies via ODR. The lesson from this is that consumers are not looking for perks and giveaways as much as they simply want to be treated fairly and not want to receive remedies they deserve, and ODR mechanisms suitably meet this need for a fair, efficient, and fast dispute resolution process. Today, non-commercial organizations are waking up to the realization of the necessity of ODR systems. For example, the American Bar Association is currently considering ways to include ODR in the ABA Pro Bono and Public Service Committee's ABA Free Legal Answers website to make it easier for lawyers and clients to resolve disputes without resorting to the conventional ADR process or court system. Similarly, the US Federal Trade Commission has also released guidelines directing businesses and commercial entities on the incorporation of ODR systems as part of good practice in business activities. ODR systems provide consumers with an easy way of resolving their complaints online, and consumers are likely to remain loyal if they are happy with the resolution of their complaints. But irreparable harm can be done to an e-commerce brand if the business fails to provide efficient means for settling claims. I will now look at the efficacy of ODR mechanisms. ODR assists parties in resolving their disputes in a simple, fast, flexible, and secure manner without the need for physical presence at a meeting or hearing. To this extent, ODR represents significant opportunities for access to dispute resolution by buyers and sellers, concluding cross-border commercial transactions in the developed and developing countries. ODR encompasses a broad range of approaches and forms, including, but not limited to, ombudsman, complaints boards, negotiation, conciliation, mediation, facilitated settlement, as well as arbitration, amongst others, and the potential for hybrid processes comprising both online and offline elements. As such, ODR represents significant opportunities for access to dispute resolution by buyers and sellers, concluding cross-border commercial transactions, both in developed and developing countries. ODR systems also assist in addressing a peculiar challenge arising out of cross-border e-commerce transactions. The fact that traditional judicial mechanisms for legal recourse may not offer adequate solution for cross-border e-commerce disputes. The legal systems in many jurisdictions, as we all know, are ill-equipped to deal with e-commerce transactions and the peculiarities of online transactions. This presents a significant challenge for ADR mechanisms, making them ill-suited to resolve e-commerce disputes with their peculiarities. But ODR systems are designed specifically to address this peculiarity by adopting unique procedures and processes that fit within the online e-commerce world. This makes the dispute resolution process faster, more effective, and satisfying for the consumers and all parties involved. The efficacy of the ODR systems also arises from the fact that it is simple, fast, and efficient, and can therefore be easily used in a real-world setting, including the fact that it does not impose costs, delays, and burdens that are disproportionate to the economic value at stake. This makes it suitable for many small value commercial transactions where the value of the transaction does not merit a conventional ADR process to resolve disputes between the parties. Finally, e-commerce requires more efficient and less litigious remedy systems that allow consumers to obtain remedies on their purchases without the cost and travel associated with traditional face-to-face procedures. ODR satisfies this need by providing consumers and businesses with a virtual dispute resolution experience that eliminates any form of physical experience and utilizes online facilities to resolve disputes between consumers and merchants or their third-party sellers. And so how do we develop an effective ODR system? For an ODR system to be effective, certain key attributes must be embedded within the system to meet the needs and desires of parties. The first is consent. The consent of the parties to engage in the dispute resolution process is fundamental and must never be compromised, regardless of the virtual nature of the ODR process. Of course, we know that consent is at the heart of any ADR process. The ODR process should be based on the explicit and informed consent of the parties, which can be obtained via express contractual documents distributed to the parties online, either before or after the dispute has arisen. These consent documents must be preserved throughout the process and afterwards to ensure a quick reference point for confirming and affirming the consent of the parties to engage in the process. Secondly, there has to be an effective ODR platform. Like we all know, ODR requires a technology-based intermediary. In other words, unlike offline ADR processes, an ODR proceeding cannot be conducted on an ad hoc basis, involving only the parties to a dispute and a neutral. That is to say, without an administrator or a registrar, as the case may be. Instead, to permit the use of technology to enable a dispute resolution process, an ODR process requires a system for generating, sending, receiving, storing, exchanging, or otherwise processing communications in a manner that ensures data security. Such a system I will refer to as an ODR platform. And such a platform should be administered and coordinated by someone, usually the registrar So the person or entity that carries out such administration and coordination is referred to as the registrar, or in some cases, as the ODR administrator. The registrar may be separate from or part of the ODR platform, but the ODR registrar administrator is essential to the success of an ODR process. And at this point, we are now going to look at what we consider to be the essential characteristics and duties of an ODR registrar or administrator. So I'll look at what I call the ODR governance and the role of an ADR registrar or administrator. ODR governance can be defined as applying policies, proper implementation, and continuous monitoring of ODR practitioners, service providers, systems, and services to ensure the underlying procedures are just and that the services are delivered in a professionally satisfactory manner in a bid to enhance and advance the purpose of the ODR process. The registrar or administrator is an essential part of the ODR process and is central to the success of the process, as he or she plays a vital role in the coordination of the process. And so what are the key duties of the registrar in the ODR process so as to ensure efficiency of the process? What are the key roles of the registrar? The roles of the registrar are as follows. A, receiving and acknowledging receipt of any communication by the ODR platform. B, notifying parties of the availability of any communication received by the ODR platform. C, keeping the parties informed of the commencement and conclusion of different stages of the proceedings. D, monitoring and enforcing deadlines for submission of necessary documents, including the power to extend deadlines for submission of documents in order to allow for some flexibility when appropriate. And E, keeping record of proceedings and ensuring that parties receive transcripts of proceedings on time. Generally, the registrar of an ODR process performs the same roles as the registrar of an arbitration panel. And in summary, their role is to coordinate and manage the process and ensure that all parties in the process, the disputing parties and the neutral, are provided with all the administrative support needed to make the process a success. I now look at what I regard as the essential attributes of an effective ADR registrar. Essential attributes of an effective ADR registrar or administrator, as I prefer to call them sometimes. The UNCITRAL, the United Nations Convention on Trade Law, or International Trade Law, has highlighted some of the essential attributes of an ADR administrator or ODR administrator to ensure an effective ODR process. The UNCITRAL Technical Notes on Online Dispute Resolution 2017 emphasize the importance of obtaining a reliable ODR administrator for the process and highlighted some of the required characteristics to include the following. Number one, transparency. Transparency is vital for the ADR administrator or registrar to ensure the parties have trust and confidence in the process, which is vital to a successful outcome. Some steps that can be taken by the administrator to ensure transparency include A, disclosing a relationship between the administrator or registrar and a particular vendor so that users of the service are informed of potential conflicts of interest. B, the administrator or registrar may publish anonymized data or statistics on outcomes in ODR processes in order to enable parties to assess its overall record consistent with applicable principles of confidentiality. And C, the registrar or administrator should ensure that all relevant information should be available on the administrator's website in a user-friendly and accessible manner. Second characteristic is that of independence. The registrar or administrator should be independent of all external influences and execute the functions of the office without bias in any form. This is very crucial to embedding trust in the process by the parties. And so to promote the independence of the registrar or administrators, the following steps can be adopted. Number one, there should be a code of ethics for ADR/ODR registrars or administrators to adopt in order to guide administrators as to conflicts of interest and other rules of conduct. And two, it is useful for the registrars or administrator, as the case may be, to adopt policies dealing with identifying and handling conflicts of interest in a prompt and timely manner. And then thirdly, the third characteristic is that of expertise. It is important that the registrar or administrator should have some expertise in two key areas, very important: dispute resolution and online or virtual or IT or digital services. Expertise in these key areas is vital to effectively discharge the functions of the administrator or registrar in an ODR process. And so to promote expertise amongst registrars, the following two steps may be taken or may be considered. First, there may be a need to implement comprehensive policies governing the selection and training of ADR/ODR registrars, which is what the ADR Center of ACCTI has been doing over the years. And two, an internal oversight/quality assurance process may be established to ensure that the registrars and administrators conform with the standards set for the office. And to ensure a smooth flow for the registrar administrator, both the registrar or an administrator of the platform should be specified in the dispute resolution clause. Finally, I end with promoting ODR systems in Nigeria. Like I've noted, Nigeria has a blossoming e-commerce sector that caters to the needs of millions of online consumers and provides quick, easy access to millions of commercial products at the tap of a phone. Large e-commerce platforms such as Jumai, Konga, and other popular e-commerce platforms have the potential to be even greater if consumer trust in online transactions are enhanced or is enhanced through the adoption of ODR processes. Even standard businesses now, standard businesses including banks, supermarkets, and other businesses can explore the limitless opportunities presented by e-commerce and online transactions, where adequate protection is incorporated to quickly and effectively resolve online disputes arising from these transactions. ODR therefore presents a great opportunity for online commerce in Nigeria to develop consumer trust and provide quick, effective means of resolving online disputes that may arise from time to time. Of course, it is very important that the registrars or administrators, as I refer to them sometimes, need to properly train and motivated to be able to administer the process. An adequate framework should therefore be developed to ensure that ODR systems can be embodied in online business dealings in the country. The Consumer Protection Council, the Standard Commission of Nigeria, and other business regulators can play leading roles in promoting the adoption of ODR systems by all businesses and commercial entities with an online presence as part of their duty to promote trade and commerce in the country, as well as protect consumer interests. Once again, I wish to thank the ADR Center of the ACCI for the opportunity. And I hope that with a few, my short presentation, I have set the stage for a more robust discussion on this topic. I wish you a successful conference, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Ofonze Amuchazi, for that wonderfully delivered paper. Thank you so much, sir. Distinguished participants this morning, conference here attendees, I hope that as I have been enlightened about ADR and ODR, about the rules of the ADR secretary and registrars, that you have been so enlightened. But hang on with us. To throw more light on this, I will invite the first panelist to talk this morning, Mr. Godwin Omoka ACN, to share his thoughts with us. Please stay tuned. Mr. Godwin ACN, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ifeanyi. Thank you very much. And I want to thank the Abuja Chamber of Commerce for inviting me, and thank my brother and learned friend, Professor Ofonze Amochiazi, SAN, for a very well-crafted and delivered paper on ADR. To be honest, Prof has covered the field, and as he kept speaking, I asked myself, what else is there to say? Because he's practically dealt with all of the issues, all of the points. But I think one fundamental point I need to point out is the fact that increasingly we are seeing that ODR has become more widely used and embraced as part of the ADR family. There has been an increase in the use of ADR in the past 10, 15 to 20 years, significant increase. But ODR as a brand of ADR, or a species of ADR, has become increasingly popular over time, especially in this technology age, because it is largely driven by the use of internet and technology. And more so recently because of the pandemic. But before now, we see it's more effective in the use of, it's more effective in the settlement of low-cost disputes, especially online disputes, low-cost disputes. And I think that that's the future of dispute resolution generally, ADR and ODR. And so Prof has touched on all of the nuggets, but I thought that the spread and the growth over time has been phenomenal. And it tells us where the dispute resolution trajectory is at this time. For instance, even in Nigeria, when we come to Nigeria, we begin to see that our courts system are also beginning to embrace the use of alternative dispute resolution system, and have even begun to make provision for the use of ADR secretaries in the resolution of disputes. For instance, the Federal High Court Alternative Dispute Rules 2019 makes significant provision for the use of arbitral secretary, an ADR secretary or registrar for the resolution of disputes. The same thing we find in most institutional rules for arbitration and mediation. For instance, the ICC rules, the Singapore International Arbitration Center rules, the Hong Kong International Arbitration Center rules. All of these rules contain provisions for the resolution of disputes by ODR, and more importantly, the role to be played by the ADR secretary in resolving these disputes. So I think that is the future. And a lot of organizations, especially corporates, are beginning to embrace ODR and the use of ADR as well. I'll tell you a short story before I round up. I'm involved currently in an arbitration where it's not an ODR arbitration, but just an arbitration where the secretary to the tribunal has been the heart, or if you like, the engine room of the process. And so it tells you the role, the significance of the ADR process in terms of communicating with the parties, passing the message of the tribunal, delivering the schedule, and ensuring that parties' pleadings and all of that are filed. The role of the ADR secretary is so critical and very and indispensable. So I think that it is the future for dispute resolution. Why do I keep saying the future? The future is actually now. It's no longer the future. We're in the future. So, I mean, it is the way to go. And increasingly, I'm thinking that there will be less emphasis on conventional or traditional modes of dispute resolution as we know them. So that would be my brief comment for now, in addition to the very erudite paper that Prof has presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Omoka ACN. After listening to Professor Ofonze ACN and Mr. Godwin Omoka ACN, I think I'm proud to be an ADR registrar. Thank you so much for adding so much value and light to our roles as ADR registrars and secretaries. Distinguished conferencees, the excitement has just begun. To shed more light, to bring more insight into our discussion this morning, permit me to call on Miss Rachel Osibo. Like I said earlier, she's a lawyer, a mediator, an arbitrator. She also holds a PhD from the Kingston. She has a PhD from the United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Miss Rachel Osibo. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Obegulu. And thank you to the ACCI DRC for this invitation. As you know, the learned SAN said before, Prof has covered the field. And at this point, we're wondering, what it is we're supposed to add. The learned field has talked about the fact that ODR is the future of ADR, whether we like it or not. And even though it's been there, COVID-19 has made it popular, and has sort of taught people that this is just the way to go. So I'm going to focus my conversation on the challenges, that may arise in us trying to use this method, as it were. Looking at our own peculiarities in Africa and Nigeria specifically. Now, there's certain benefits you get from a face-to-face meeting, which are, for instance, eyeball-to-eyeball conversations, with the other parties. In instances where we're going to be using ODR, you're not going to have that opportunity. So it's very easy to have instances of miscommunication, because there are no verbal cues for you to follow, or non-verbal cues rather for you to follow, so it's easy for people to sort of mask what they're feeling. And remember that especially in instances of mediation and even in arbitration during cross-examination, for instance, you want to be able to see, what the witness, watch the witness when they're speaking, because it does tell you a lot, so you may have instances where some conflict sort of escalates simply because people aren't communicating very well. There might also arise the issues of illiteracy, with understanding the technology, so to say. Even in the meetings we're having recently online, you see that lots of people have not sort of figured out how these systems are supposed to work. So you're going to have people struggle, with how to use the different facilities. So one of the jobs, that the ADR secretary would have to take on would be to make sure that the parties, in choosing, whatever platform they're going to use, that they actually understand the platforms, give them the options. So the job of the secretary would be to give the options and explain those options very clearly, and maybe go a step further, to make sure that the option that is chosen is an option that the parties, are all comfortable with, as against an option where maybe party A is familiar with Cisco and both parties are familiar with WebEx. It would be better to choose a platform that most people are familiar with. There will be also the issues of digital divide, gender, age, cultural differences. Those peculiarities are sort of more emphasized during an online process, because certain things are just easier to manage when people are physically in the room. So there are lots of these things that we're going to have to try to conquer going forward. I've already mentioned the lack of awareness of these platforms and the fact that the secretary, the ADR administrator, ODR administrator, as we call it, it seems going forward, would have to explain to the parties. Another issue that's actually like at the fore will be issues of security and confidentiality. Like, we can't overemphasize. In the last couple of months, when we started going online so much, there have been quite a number of issues of, people in a meeting getting hacked, access to documents, from people who shouldn't have access to those documents. I remember that if an arbitration or a mediation proceeding rests firmly on confidentiality, so imagine that the bulk of documents are going to be flying between parties, the neutral or arbitrator, as the case may be, suddenly I'm in the sphere of people who shouldn't have any business with those documents. So it'll be very important that in choosing the platform, for that proceeding, issues of security should be at the forefront. I mean, I'm not going to be selling any specific platform, but WebEx seems to be one of the ones that seems to be handling the issues of security quite well. Recently, I think I also heard of Opus 2. Opus 2 is a platform that helps you manage proceedings, so like an ODR administration platform. So they also provide quite a high level of security, and I think international arbitration, there's a platform like that too. So parties, neutrals, arbitrators, the secretary, who is the oil in the wheel of progress in any dispute resolution process, needs to be very knowledgeable, on those systems. And then one of the issues that has also arisen is the issue of jurisdiction. This will be in arbitration. So we're having this hearing online, or if it's hybrid, part of it is online. What now becomes the seat of that arbitration? And a number of conversations are ongoing, because some scholars have said there's really no seat. But I think that we can still go back to the provisions for the New York Convention on how to deal with that. Looking at it from whether we should use the procedural law, the law that the parties have chosen as the law that will guide the procedure, or use the substantive law, which law is closest to the dispute. Or you can also just get parties to agree, have a conversation at the point when the proceedings begin, and everything needs to be in writing, as we are aware, even if it's a mediation proceeding. Let there be some kind of contractual paper trail that shows that parties have agreed, that this is the seat, for this dispute resolution, so that I don't take up all the time. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rachel. Thank you so much for that refreshing packet of knowledge. Distinguished participants, please, as we go on, if you have comments, please type your comments in the chat section. If you also have questions that if you want our keynote speaker or any of the panelists to address, please type it in the chat section and we will come back to that. let's keep the train moving. Now, I'm excited about this because I'm about to introduce another panelist, Mrs. Ozioma Izura. Why am I excited about this panelist? She is an international arbitrator. She is an international alternative dispute resolution expert. She has serious interest on international investment disputes and international commercial disputes. So please join me as I welcome Ms. Izura to share her thoughts and knowledge with us. Ms. Izura, you have the floor, madam.
Thank you, fine. Welcome, participants and everyone. Can you hear me clearly? Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, you are.
Yes, I welcome all participants, and having listened to Professor Ofonza Mutazi, I agree with those who have spoken before that he fairly covered the field. But I'd like to take us a little bit to where we are in Nigeria, vis-a-vis ODR and ADR generally. We're still at the point where a lot of what we do is a traditional arbitration. And Rachel has helpfully exposed all the problems that are linked with online dispute resolution. Like this morning, we had quite a bit of glitches trying to start this conference. And then something in Professor Amutazi's presentation, he leaned a lot on, vendors in the online business terrain. In Nigeria, go to social media, you will see people offering a lot of things. And I have taken notice of the fact that all of them kind of rely on pay on delivery. That is part of that trust issue which Prof talks about. There is so little trust between those who shop online. In fact, once I had ordered something online and changed my mind. Why? Because the vendor was supposed to be in Lagos and said, if you're outside of Lagos, we will supply within 3 days. And then he calls me the next day and was like, Madam, where are you? We're ready to deliver. And I'm like, oh, this can't be real. 3 days haven't passed. You know what? I've changed my mind. That trust deficit, many people have had to forgo the monies they have spent shopping, even on Jumia, Konga, and all of that. And you hear them grumbling everywhere else except where they should go. So in line with what the center is looking at, vis-a-vis how can we develop ODR in Nigeria, I'd like to suggest that there's a whole lot of education necessary to bring these vendors into the space where they begin to appreciate that these facilities exist and can be developed, and then where consumers get to understand that they can indeed trust the process. Maybe with a center like the ADR Center standing in the gap, they might have the confidence to engage. Whereas straightforward shopping from people's platforms and all that might not give them that. So there is a lot of work because most of these online vendors, the power balance between the vendors and the consumers is large. Most of the time it will be an agreement you did not really consent to, but because you're shopping, you just sign something. And then we know that in the face of this COVID, a lot of ordinary arbitration, which would have been face-to-face, have moved online, even trainings and everything else. This today, we're here virtually. We could also have been face-to-face doing this. So there are varieties of what can happen online, as has already been alluded to. It could be totally online binding arbitration. It could be totally online non-binding arbitration, depending on how much consent the customer is deemed to have given. And then it could be unilateral binding online arbitration, partly online binding arbitration, partly online unilaterally binding arbitration, partly online non-binding arbitration. So there are all sorts of varieties that one can look into. And these are the things that both the vendor and the customer needs a whole lot of education on. With our system the way it is, we can't just jump in. Okay, traditionally, the registrar has a known role. He's a person or an institution that administers, facilitates, coordinates the conduct of arbitral reference. It goes without saying that the registrar also has to know what the arbitral reference procedure is like and be able to appreciate their role of being the engine, but without being an interferer in the process. Because on international plane, cases like the case of Sonatrach and Statoil had already gone to court because of the perception that the registrar appeared to have acted as a fourth arbitrator. So we cannot lose sight of the limitations of being a registrar. You must know a registrar remains a registrar, whether you're the institution or a person. So you cannot forget your role of administering, facilitating, and coordinating, and go beyond to become an arbitrator. All of these things are more emphasized, as Rachel says, when things go online. And you know, most people whose cases are not going well are not happy people. So they're looking for ways to rubbish whatever award will come. Registrars and administrators need to be especially trained on the limits that they can interfere or intervene in arbitral proceeding and not give room for parties to impugn the award that will come from the process. So I do not know if this has been enough, but we note that on international plane, even though some of the institutional rules do not provide specifically for registrars, they always have the further communication that whoever a registrar is must be communicated to the parties. So now the ADR Center, in trying to develop this new area, must work with those named institutions that Prof talked about, the CPC and SON, and then other providers to know what the registrar in ODR arbitration process needs to know. Can I stop thus far and take it later? Hello? Have I been speaking to myself? Can you hear me fine? Okay, it's all part of the problem with ADR, isn't it?
You have been audible and clear. We heard you perfectly well, madam.
Thank you. Thank you. All right.
Thank you so much for adding so much value. Distinguished participants, I hope we are having an exciting time. As we could see, or rather as you can see now, there's substitutes from different masters and of the we also heard from the Orchin of Wisdom, Mr. Godwin Omoaka, ACN. We went ahead and heard from the articulate Ms. Rachel Osibo. Now we just finished hearing from an authority in international arbitration and alternative dispute resolution, Mrs. Ozioma Oziora. If I have your permission, permit me to unleash our final panelists. You know, we saved the best for the last. It is my honor and privilege to introduce to you Mrs. Diane Okoko. She's going to be our final panelist for today. She is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Mediators and Conciliators, a member of the London Court of International Arbitration. She is also a member of the Society of Construction Industry Arbitration, and also a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, United Kingdom, Nigerian branch. Please fasten your seatbelts as I bring aboard Mrs. Diana Okoko. Mrs. Diana, you have the floor, madam.
Thank you, Mr. Obegulu, for your very kind words. And might I seize this opportunity to thank the commerce and industry, and thank very much the keynote speaker, Professor Amuchiazi, for having done my job for me completely. So right now, it's so easy for me to say, he has said everything. Thank you so much, Leonard Silk, and to all of the panelists before me. Thank you for setting the stage so nicely. So at this point, it would be overburdening our participants if I go over what the earlier panelists have said. But let me just pick on from somewhere, right? And I want to speak about the tools that an ODR registrar should equip themselves with in the new norm. Knowing that the registrar role is actually an administrative role, the next thing to ask is, apart from knowing administration, apart from knowing that their job is to ensure a seamless arbitration, to ensure that the interaction between the tribunal and the parties is as seamless and as fluid as it can be, what other job do they have? And I'll summarize it as this. Their next job is to be a tech geek. Because truth be said, in the new norm, we cannot operate functionally and make the job of the tribunal easy and make the arbitration as seamless as possible without knowing how technology functions, how we can participate in the functioning of the technology, and ensuring that an online dispute resolution is done as seamlessly as it can. So I'm going to look at certain online platforms. Rachel had mentioned that there are some, online platforms and what they do. Their job really is to administer the arbitration. So as an online registrar, what you should be asking yourself is, am I familiar with these platforms? I have had firsthand experience with Opus 2 that Rachel mentioned, and the IAC, International Arbitration Center. The platforms are extremely easy to use, but I had to go for certain levels of training. So if you see, that there are these trainings, the CI app, for instance, has offered one or two online dispute resolution trainings to learn how to use these platforms. So I would ask every participants today who aspires to know how to function in an online dispute resolution to attend one of these. Even Delos has certain levels of training. And you see, the Delos training is so in-depth that it not only teaches the administrative parts of online dispute resolution, it goes further to even teach you advocacy online. So if you looked at those platforms, then, go for the trainings. The trainings are there, and, rightly so, they would be online, because if they're teaching you to function online, they should have online trainings, right? So you don't need to go anywhere. At the comfort of your home, get it done. Because the truth is, at this point, if I had an situation where I'm sitting in a trial looking to appoint as my registrar is, how good are you with, tech? How much of these platforms have you been exposed to? Because like Mrs. Izora said, one of the roles and the jobs of a registrar is also to protect the sanctity of the award that the tribunal will be handing down at the end of the process. It's not only your job to, administer. You also need to be on the same page as your tribunal to ensure that whatever award is being handed down is an award that no one can touch. None of the parties, even if they tried, can set aside. So you also have that role to play. Then secondly, there are a number of tools that you can use. So if you're saying that you would like the arbitration to go as seamlessly as possible, what tools are you familiar with? How much do you know about using the Google Calendar, for instance? If I were to send an invite out, instead of sending just a normal invite, I could very simply send a calendar invite, and that way, every recipient of that invite automatically has the date stored in their calendars. So if I had a million things to do that day, once the reminder comes up, I remember I'm supposed to go in for my meeting. This helps your tribunal. It makes you indispensable to your tribunal. And every panelist has mentioned that the registrar is actually the engine room. I remember Leonard Silk, Mr. Omoka mentioned that arbitration he was in, his secretary actually made it seamless. The secretary was the engine room. I know he was really happy because, for him to remember and mention that now, that secretary probably made a good impression on him. And this is the job of the secretary. Google Docs, for instance, instead of going back and forth, sending drafts to the tribunal, you could just use the Google Docs, so the tribunals drafts, in real time, and they can respond in real time. Remember that one of the attractions to arbitration is time. By, having these tools at your fingertips, then the attraction for arbitration remains there for parties. Also, there are apps that you have that automatically arrange your documents. So if you were sorting out, the evidence file, and remember, everything now is going to be online. So instead of the tribunal going through loads and loads and loads of, this evidence that have been filed, you sort them out for the tribunal because you have these apps that are there. There are so many online organizers. So the evidences go into one organizer, the emails go into the second organizer, the pleadings go into the third organizer, so that when I am looking at this thing, all I need to do is go into one environment and I see them in different areas. So I don't need to go through bundles and bundles of documents to get to that particular document that I'm looking for. Also, you see there are certain apps that you can use, certain platforms that automatically, while they're recording, transcribe – so that as soon as I left description, in my email, for instance, right? So, but you need to be familiar with these things. And the truth is, one secret I must let you in is that a career in arbitration is not only about being an arbitrator or being counsel. There is also that level that you can get to as a tribunal secretary, where the kinds of references that you will serve will be in the hundreds of millions. So look at the Yokus arbitration, for instance. The tribunal secretary was a QC, and a QC is an equivalent of the Leonard Silks, right? So you'd be asking yourself, what kind of secretary role would a Leonard Silk play? But trust me, if that role had, a secretary fee of, say, 50 million naira. So at this point, I shall yield the floor to the two Leonard Silks so that they can answer that question, whether or not they will take the role or give it up. So thank you for listening, and thank you again to the ACCI for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Diana, for that exciting contribution. Leonard Silk, sir, the floor is open to you to help us address Ms. Diana's question.
Oh, she knows the answer. She knows the answer already. Okay. 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 Thank you very much, everyone. I must say I've been enriched by the contribution from the panelists. Of course, when you have a rich panel such as this, people with diverse experience, and in fact, for what Diana has said, Aisha, I'm going to go for the next training of registrars, so that when this kind of brief comes up, I don't mind if I'm going to be recommended as a registrar. Okay, so I don't know if are there any questions, or I think we're done.
Yeah, we have a few questions, as we are still awaiting more comments and questions from our conferences. Please, participants and honorable conferences, if you have more questions or comments, go to the chat section and drop it in there, and be assured I will read it out. The keynote speaker and panelists, some of our conferences this morning want to know whether the role of the secretary or registrar in an ADR proceeding or arbitration is regulated by any statute or law.
This, Diane or myself?
Do you want? Okay, if I may jump in, if I may throw my hat into the ring, I don't think it is so much of regulation. There isn't any regulation, so to speak. But of course, like I mentioned earlier, you have institutional rules that make provision for ADR secretaries. You also, and registrars, you also have the Federal High Court Alternative Dispute Resolution Rules 2018 that makes similar provisions. But in respect of ad hoc arbitrations and maybe non-institutional mediations as well, these are not there. It will all depend on the parties' desire to use either an arbitral secretary or an ADR secretary or registrar. So there is no regulations really, so to speak, because it's not a process that is regulated. But you have these institutional rules that makes provision for these things, for that rule, and of course the Federal High Court rules, ADR rules 2018 as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Leonard Silk, Mr. Godwin Omoka, for that insightful input. I believe our participants have a better understanding with regards to that. One one of our participants also wishes to know whether the role of whether the registrar, although I think Ms. Diane, you will answer this for us, whether the registrar and secretary is entitled to share the same fees as the tribunal.
Are you joking?
Rachel is laughing because she can attest to how much, and the learned prof had already given a response, when I asked that question. So, definitely yes.
Can I jump in? Can I jump in?
Please go on.
No, the registrar does not share in the arbitrator's fees. The arbitrator proposes a registrar, and the parties agree to accept the said registrar, and then they will agree what to pay the registrar. So the registrar does not share anything. Registrar is paid for registrar's job, which is administrative.
Yes,
I don't know if
you see, the thing is, there are times when the parties do not consent to having a registrar, because quite honestly, the registrar is at, the position is at the discretion of the tribunal, except in certain institutional arbitrations, right? So I've had experiences where the tribunal has said, okay, so if you're not going to pay the registrar because we need this registrar, we will pay. So even one ongoing now, the parties have said, this is the limit to which we can pay. And the tribunal of the sole arbitrator has said, you know what, I'm going to give you this. And this is an arbitration that I am handling. So out of my fee, I'm giving the registrar, in addition to what, because I know what role that registrar is going to play. So if I understood the question, correctly, which I was answering was, is the registrar going to share out of the full arbitration costs on less, of course, the written was out of the arbitrator's fees? If it's the arbitration cost, yes, because the registrar fee is part of, the arbitration costs, right? Arbitration costs.
Yeah, but you would have charged it at your discretion. You did this at your discretion. That's the point. Because the registrar cannot go to court to enforce her fees. Do you understand what I mean? You were paid at your discretion. You decided you needed the registrar. At your discretion, you paid out of your fees. It's not an entitlement. It was your discretion. That's the point I'm making. So we don't give the wrong impression to those who are aspiring to become ADR registrars tomorrow, when the tribunal meets and they want to discuss fees, they say, hey, you haven't talked about my fees. Do you understand what I'm trying to avoid? Registrar doesn't have a voice in what goes on, to the extent that the parties and the tribunal let registrar be considered. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Ozioma and Mrs. Diane.
Can I just make some comment on that? I think
Go ahead.
both of them have made the points. But like Diane said, I have a practice. If I'm fortunate to be a president arbitrator, I've been lucky, so to say, that my co-arbitrators have always cooperated with me, and I ensure that my registrar gets well paid. I feel the registrar plays a very important role. While I agree it's not, you won't see registrar's fees per se. What you see is administrative fees, but I always ensure that my registrar gets well paid. In fact, we just finished one where my registrar got about 5 million. I insisted. And my co-arbitrators didn't have any problem. Once I said, look, it's only fair that registrar gets something reasonable. So I think that is also one way of encouraging the younger ones, because I have seen situations where some arbitrators have argued and said, oh, it's just a registrar and we shouldn't pay more than 200,000 or 300,000. I always said, no, that's not fair. So well, it's not an entitlement, but I think it's if we have the opportunity wherever we find ourselves, it'd be nice to encourage the registrars by ensuring that they also get something reasonable out of the entire arbitration cost, like Diane mentioned.
You're right, of course.
If I may jump in there, Mr. Begulu. Prof, so your next arbitration, you would have to appoint me as your registrar. But that being said, in my experience, what I've seen a lot of arbitrators do, because parties are usually okay until you mention the fees for the arbitral secretary, and then everyone starts asking, do we really need the secretary? But what the arbitrators usually say is, well, you're going to pay administrative costs one way or another, so it doesn't matter whether we have the secretary or not. That money is going to be paid. So you're not paying anything extra outside of the administrative costs. The secretary will just be paid from the administrative costs. So a lot of people do deal with it in that way. But I think I agree with Diane. If the amount that parties are willing to pay is really, really small, depending on the tribunal, arbitrators may decide to cover some of that cost. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me chip in before we round up on this point. I think I would say we have to be careful, just like Ozioma said, not to give the wrong impression. Generally, the secretary's fee or registrar's fee is part of the administrative cost of the tribunal. And I find it a bit anomalous for an arbitrator to agree to give a portion of his fee, to the registrar or secretary. And what does that point out? That clearly tells you that the other arbitrators are not in sync with the appointment of the secretary, either because the fees is too expensive or for whatever reason. And then the next question I'm asking myself is, if I choose to share my fees with a supposed registrar or secretary, is that person really the secretary of the tribunal?
Hello?
When the other arbitrators, yes, or my secretary, when the other arbitrators have not agreed to that fee. So I think we have to be very careful, because the practice, the norm as we know it, is that the arbitral secretary or registrar is paid from the administrative fees of the tribunal. Is his or her fee is factored into the administrative fee paid from that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, keynote speaker and distinguished panelists. Our viewers and participants this morning, we have heard it. But the beauty of ADR is that whatever the parties agree binds them. If upon appointment it is agreed that the registrar will be paid from the administrative fees, it will be paid. If the arbitrator also agrees to share, but the good thing and the wonderful thing is that the ADR or secretary does not go home empty-handed.
That's fine.
Yes. Like Rachel has said, I will also give application to Professor Amuchazi. I want to be part of that 5 million bounty.
I'm on top of that line already. If they don't know, tell them. I'm already on top of the line.
Another of our participants this morning wants to know, is the ADR registrar the same, or does it have the same functions, or is it the same thing as a court registrar?
I would say yes. I would say yes, but you see, arbitration is like like litigation. Everything about arbitration, like you say, is what the parties want. So the parties have chosen their tribunal, they choose their registrar, whereas the court is a state-funded organization and employs registrars. That's the difference, but they perform the same functions.
Okay.
That's my
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Okema, for that insightful knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, do we have any other contribution to that? Okay, Ms. Diane Okoko, the next question is directed to you, madam. A participant wants to know, you said you mentioned some apps that record and translate things simultaneously. How can they access these apps, madam?
Okay, it's to the ACCI secretariat so that it can be circulated.
Hello, Mrs. A participant wants to know, this question is directly directed to Ms. Diane Okoko. A participant wants to know that you mentioned some apps that can be used to record and translate proceedings simultaneously. They want to know whether you can direct them on how to access these apps.
Yes, Mr. Begolu, I was saying, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, madam.
Wait, so I was saying I will give a full list of the platforms as well as the tools that help, the participants. When the recording of this conference is being circulated, they can attach to the recording and send out. So I was asking you and Aisha if this would be done.
Okay, thank you. When the registrar is coming up now to give her vote of thanks, she will address that. Thank you so much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, your excellencies, now we are at the last part of this conference this morning. Permit me to invite the Registrar General of the Dispute Resolution Center of the Abuja Chamber of Commerce to give her vote of thanks. It is my honor and privilege to introduce and bring on board Ms. Aisha Ado Ibrahim. Ms. Aisha, you have the floor, madam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ifeanyi. It's Aisha Ado Abdullah. I did not get the question that I was supposed to address by Mrs. Diane. The line was breaking. Were you asking if this event is being recorded? Something like that. Mrs. Diane, were you asking if
what I said? What I said.
Maybe if you can type it, because I think your network is not so clear. If you can type it on the chat section, I'll be able to address it. So it has been a very, very lively event. I'm so glad this team is a very special team, and I don't think we could have had any better team. I want to profoundly thank everyone for finding time to join the conference. I want to especially thank our keynote speaker, Hon Professor Ofonze for a well-delivered, enlightening keynote address. I want to also warmly appreciate all the panelists, Mr. Godwin Omoaka, Mrs. Diane Okoko, Mrs. Ozioma Isura, Miss Rachel Osibu, who have all brought their wealth of experience to bear and doing justice to the theme of the conference during the discussions and addressing the question brilliantly. The main objective of this conference was to provide an opportunity for ADR practitioners as well as those interested in being ADR registrars and those who have been initiated into field, because it is now growing into a very good field of practice of ADR. So we were able to bring together experts who have had a good experience both in serving as arbitrators or ADR experts and serving as ADR registrars. Mrs. Diane gave an example of someone, well, I'm not sure, I know she also has the experience. So as much as I don't want to expose any one of us, but let me use my own experience. I have served as a registrar, and the issue of fees, it's good and bad, but then there's no bad experience as far as I'm concerned, because every experience is a learning experience. So it's not about Naira and Kobo. So you get handsomely paid with experience, with knowledge. So I thank you all. It is apparent that we have done justice. We have achieved our objective today by bringing in experienced ADR practitioners, and you discussed this and you've done justice to the topic. I really, really have no words to appreciate and thank you all. With the various recommendations given by the keynote speaker and panelists, I'm sure participants will be better equipped going forward. Those who have had no idea of what it meant would now, I'm sure, we have whet their appetite, would need to seek more knowledge. And of course, all of us are available for anyone who would want to probe in more, ask more questions. We are available at the Dispute Resolution Center, and all our panelists and keynote speaker can also be contacted. Of course, we would seek their permission to share their contact details when it's required. So thank you very much. Let me find Ms. Diane's question. Okay, Ms. Diane informed us that she's going to send the list of training and tools for participants that would be useful. Right, Ms. Diane?
Yes.
Okay.
I can answer for her, yes.
I know we are all busy. On my phone, I'm on another webinar. I know we all have a lot that we have to get to. It's 1 o'clock already. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much. Hello. Thank you.